Scripture reading is from Psalm 139.
Chapter, verses 1 through 24. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. You search out my path and my lying down, and are acquainted with all of my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. You hem me in behind and before, and lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. Where shall I go from your spirit, or where shall I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there. If I take the wings of the morning and dwell in the uttermost parts of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. For you formed my inward parts, you knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when it was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God! How vast is the sum of them! If I would count them, they are more than the sand. I awake, and I am still with you. Oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God! O men of blood, depart from me. They speak against you with malicious intent. Your enemies take your name in vain. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with complete hatred. I count them my enemies. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any grievous way in me, and lead me in the way everlasting. The word of the Lord. You may be seated.
Kids are dismissed at this time.
Well, good morning. This morning we get some respite from horns and beasts. The book of Daniel, we enter into the Psalms. And we're going to be starting, it's a 5-week series on what we've called training in honest prayer. Training in honest prayer. Now, years ago, it's going a while back, but just after I'd finished my master's degree in London, England, I remember having a cup of coffee with a friend of mine who also just finished his master's, and we were actually in the same focus area, but he was ordained in the Church of England, and I was considering ordination. So I wanted to sort of ask him these questions to sort of clarify whether, I felt, I should be ordained. I was exploring that path, and we had probably an hour, maybe 90-minute conversation in which I still, at the end of it, didn't actually get any more clarity on whether I felt, this is for me, I was thinking about becoming an ordained minister, and then he said this to me. He said, look, Nathan, this question is going to cut through the noise. Are you comfortable with mess? Because he said, that's a good indicator. If the answer to that is yes, then, I would say that's a good indicator that you could be, church ministry, the pastorate could be for you. That's not necessarily a surefire solution, but it is an indication. Now, if you were to say no, it's like, I'm not comfortable with mess, then actually I would say, throw up the caution sign, like this might not be for you. Now, I share that story with you because when we come to the Psalms, there's mess. There's mess in the Psalms. And when we come to the Psalms, it's not just mess full stop. It's mess in the sense of giving a wide range, perhaps the widest in the whole of Scripture range of human emotion, from anger, fierce anger, to joy, from profound sadness, grief, loss, to rejoicing. All these emotions expressed before the Lord. But it's not just the human experience, is also a rich theology that we see in these 150 Psalms. It's a picture, it's a very rich picture of who God is. So it's this both end of seeing a rich picture of God in the Psalms, but also a picture of ourselves. John Calvin called the Psalms a mirror. It acts as a type of mirror of the soul. If you want to see actually what you and I are really like, what we are capable of, the Psalms actually gives us that mirror, as Calvin would put it, mirror of the soul. This morning we're going to be looking at the Psalm just read for us by Daniel, Psalm 139. Now just give you a couple quick, maybe a sidebar before we get into it. And it's this, I might have a Freudian slip here and say David in terms of the author, but the author, I don't want to major on the minors too much here, but there are many authors in the Psalms. David, the shepherd turned king, is accredited with 70 plus Psalms. Solomon, the great king, wrote some as well. Other people named, say, Asaph and the sons of Korah. There are others who are credited with writing the Psalms. We're not sure exactly who wrote this psalm, but for all intents and purposes, we will refer to him as the psalmist, and a person that, any way you cut it, is someone looking to God to deliver him. He's looking to God to rescue him in that situation that he's in, place of trouble. Training in honest prayer. So what we'll do is we'll look at this psalm, almost just walk through it section by section, and then we'll look at the theological picture that is painted for us in this psalm, and that will provide the means by which you and I hopefully are encouraged, we're inspired, we're challenged, and shaped in a way that actually when we come to prayer, we're honest. We're able to actually bring ourselves, all of ourselves, to God. Hopefully that is something that we'll capture in this psalm, Psalm 139. Let's pray. Father, in these next few moments, speak to us, Lord, please, in your mercy, in your grace, in your love, in your power. Please help us to hear your voice, God, and help us in our hearts to respond to you. We pray that these words that are given, these beautiful, majestic words in this psalm, personal words, would somehow penetrate to both heart and mind and change us, Lord. For your sake, for your glory, in your name, amen. So Psalm 139, it's not only, the Psalms give us a wide range of human emotion, but they're also different genres. Some is more resembling in the Psalms to wisdom literature. Others are lament. Others look more like a love song. Some look like a hymn. And here, I would say verses 1 to 18, it has the contours of a hymn / this love song to God, expressing the greatness of who God is. And from the beginning, the very beginning of Psalm 139, the psalmist is painting this picture of a God who is like no other. He's a God who knows him personally. O Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts from afar. Knowledge, the knowledge of God from the very beginning is something that the psalmist is painting, this picture that God knows him. And actually that word to know in the Hebrew is the word yada, and it's actually used 7 times in this, what many would call a poem. Psalm 139 is seen as a poem by some Old Testament scholars. It's used once, the word to know is used once in verse 1, again in verse 2, and then also in verse 4. Even before a word is on my tongue, behold, O Lord, you know it altogether. Verse 6, such knowledge, that's again that word to know, is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. And verse 14, I praise you for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. And then in verse 23, it's used twice. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts. The question is, what's the purpose of that? Because in a way that can just be academic, like, okay, what did he do? He used the word 7 times. What does that mean? Is it just academic? Well, I want to suggest to you that actually when we do a bit of digging, contextually speaking, there's intent. It's not just, oh, that's really creative. No, there's a reason, because he's pointing out the great care and attention that God gives to us as human beings. the great care and attention that God gives to him, the psalmist. This knowledge is not just encyclopedic knowledge to sort of point us to, wow, God, he knows everything. No, it's a personal. It's as what theologians would call this I-thou framework of actually it's relational knowledge. It's not just saying, wow, he's God, he knows everything. No, he knows me, he knows you. That's why it's used so much. It's to punctuate this point of actually how great God is. It's an intimate knowledge. To sort of just cut to the chase, it has intimate connotations. Now, and when we use the word intimacy or intimate, it sort of gets lost or it's misused because at a cultural level, we think of it as maybe a romanticized word or a sexualized word. It's, intimate is like, whoa, okay, you're going to go there, whoa. But actually, intimacy, just to sort of give you a shorthand version of it, which I think many of us would already identify with. I remember when I was going to counseling, this is years ago, the therapist with whom I was meeting, she said, intimacy, Nathan, in layperson speak, is into me you see. So intimacy, strictly speaking, just means that into me you see. In other words, when we talk about, in this case, God having intimate knowledge of you, intimate knowledge of the psalmist, it means actually God sees into you. He knows you actually better than yourself, says the Psalm 139. It's not just encyclopedic, it's actually relational weight and gravitas to it. Is actually he knows you into me, God sees. Intimate knowledge. So the idea behind God's knowledge is not just that he knows, it's actually his care. And more than that, we get into verse 5, this knowledge is actually attentive presence. Attentive presence. Verse 5, you hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me. God has surrounded the psalmist. His knowledge is not just he knows stuff. Actually, no, it's intimate. He knows you relationally. He really knows us. But also his knowledge means actually he's with us. He surrounds us. And here we find a very beautiful picture of who God is. And in one sense, we could tease out a lot of, say, doctrine or theology, say, wow, this is, the omniscience of God. He's everywhere. God is everywhere. Omnipresence and omniscience. He knows everything and he's everywhere. But actually, it's more than that. It's more than just doctrine because this is intensely personal. Because there's a crescendo in all of this, all of these observations. Even before a word is on my tongue, you know it all together. You know when I sit and when I rise. You surround me. All of this eventually leads to wonder. Verse 6, such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is high, I cannot attain it. And here we have a bit of a tension. Because in one sense, some scholars would say, here's almost a celebration of God's knowledge. And that is true. That may be true, but actually others would say, actually, no, when we do a bit of digging, it's the psalmist saying he's having difficulty. He's actually at a spot where he's like, I don't understand this. I don't understand how you can know all this about me. I don't know how do you know this? How are you all around me? He's actually having difficulty. So yeah, I think there's a tension that he is in wonder and there's praise, but also he's actually having flat out difficulty figuring out how can God be like this? How can there be a being who knows me like that and is all around me? There's genuine difficulty. There's a very rich, massive picture of God on display in that moment. Augustine, one of the early church fathers, said many statements that, were sort of showstoppers, but one time he said, if you can understand it, it's not God. If you can understand it, it's not God. And we can sort of pick that apart and say, well, I'm not sure, but the idea is you can never exhaust knowledge of God. You can just plumb and plumb and plumb and plumb, and you will never get to the bottom of it. Because that is the immensity, the enormity of who God is. We can know something. I mean, ultimately, Jesus Christ has shown us who God is. God in flesh, but still we can never just know everything there is to know about God. And this is almost Exhibit A, Psalm 139. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. And this difficulty, this wonder of God's love, his knowledge, his presence leads to an escape. Verse 7, where shall I go from your spirit? Where shall I flee from your presence? And we could look at it, hey, why is the psalmist, why is he wanting to escape? Is it fear? Is it shame? Is it guilt? Why is he wanting to escape? And I want to suggest to you, we don't really get an answer in here. And I think the reason why we don't get an answer, because I think the reason why we don't get an answer is because that's not the point. The point is still the focus being God, because as we see here, it's where shall I go from your spirit? Where shall I flee from your presence? And then he actually gives a lot of detail. If I go to heaven, well, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. If I take the wings of the morning, in other words, that's referring to the east, where the sun rises, or to the uttermost parts of the sea, referring to the distant horizon on the west. In other words, it's vertical and horizontal. If I go to the east and the west, all these places where actually, if I go there, I can go to a spot where you will not be. You're there. If I go all the way over here, you're there. If I go to heaven, you're there. If I go to Sheol, in other words, this place it signifies death and chaos. That place, that's a ghettoized area for God. There's no way he's going to be there. You're there still. He is saying, you are the inescapable God. And he's painting a very detailed picture, both vertical and horizontal, saying, no matter where I go, up, down, east, west, you are there. And he continues in verse 11, it just keeps going and going. Surely the darkness shall cover me. Surely the darkness, darkness we associate, and rightfully so, the Jewish mind associated darkness with evil. Surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light about me be night. But, verse 12, but even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is bright as the day, for darkness is as light with you. So here we are, we're given these different pictures of wanting to escape. And when we go to these places where we're almost assured, okay, God will not be there, the psalmist is saying, actually, no, the place where we would say, not there, God actually is there. And then the psalmist enters into praise, expressing wonder, particularly at the intricate care God has given to him in creating him. Verse 13, you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. The Hebrew, we lose it in translation. It wouldn't make sense because in the Hebrew, that word there, inward parts, is the kidneys. And so, rightfully so, in the English translation, they wouldn't say, you formed my kidneys, because I think for many of us would say, well, what does that mean? We sort of knew that, but the idea there is actually, it covers, it's more all-encompassing. It actually means the mind, the heart, it's the emotion, the moral character, and the physical aspect. God has created every part of us. That's the idea. But we actually even get more. So not only has he formed us, God has formed us, but we even get even more detail. Verse 16, your eyes saw my unformed substance. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when as yet there was none of them. Do you see how mind-blowing this is? He's giving us a picture of prenatal fashioning. That yes, God knew us in the womb, but prenatal, he knew us before we were. Wow. God created him. The psalmist is having difficulty with this, and he thinks about it, he's writing about it, how God has made him, has formed him, has seen him. It all becomes overwhelming. In verse 17, it almost comes to a head. How precious are your thoughts, O God? How vast is the sum of them? If I would count them, they are more than the sand. And then we move over to verse 19. And verse 19, it's almost like, gets a bit spicy. It's like one of those, I remember one commentator saying about just generally passages in the Bible, he said they're quick, turn the page moments in the scriptures. And this is a bit like, wait, hold on a second. We were having this sort of peace, tranquility moment here, and he sort of ruined it. It's like, oh, that you would slay the wicked, O God. Oh, men of blood, depart from me. Well, hold on. What's going on there? That's a bit disturbing. It's a bit jarring. This is a different tone. What is happening there? Well, clearly, David, Freudian slip. Not sure. It could have been David, but the psalmist, at any rate, is saying he has enemies. I hate those who hate you, God. And it is perplexing at first. It almost sounds like, well, not sure. This doesn't look Doesn't look like Jesus. Would Jesus be saying something like this? And I want to suggest to you that it is perplexing. There's complexity here, and I'm not sure if I would say this is prescriptive, but at the very least, it actually does give us permission to be honest in our prayers. Because one of the questions we ask when we come to God, I don't know about you, but for me, is definitely, can I say this thing? Can I say that to God? Is that okay if I say this to God? And this psalm is saying very loud and clear, yes. Why? What reason? How we actually justify that? Because he knows me. He already knows me. He knows me actually better than I know myself. He's around me. And he desires me to just bring it all, air it out, bring it to him. And in one sense, yes, we could see the psalmist saying, whoa, that doesn't look right. But it does give us permission. And also there's tension because there is holy zeal in this too, because actually we see when we do a bit of digging, these words, the wicked, men of blood, in the Psalms, generally that refers to people who are violent and murderers. So the psalmist is actually calling those people out. He's speaking out against those people who are violent, who are murderers, people who not only hate God, but they embody the act of hate against God. Perhaps the prescription, so to speak, if we were to put a prescriptive element to all this, is actually how the psalm ends. Because the psalmist doesn't end by actually just putting it all out there. He concludes by saying, search me. In other words, examine me. Know me. Lead me in the way everlasting. Yes, there's raw emotion, and it gives us permission to actually bring ourselves to God. But in the end, the psalmist turns to God and says, God, I need you. I need you. I need you to help me. Search me. In a way, it's very poetic, pardon the pun, because actually that's where he begins. God, you have searched me. You know me. And it ends by him saying, search me. Know me. Lead me. So the question is, how does this lead us? How does this psalm push us to honest prayer? And here I would like to borrow a structure from a guy named, he's passed away now, but a brilliant Bible scholar named Derek Kidner. And I want to borrow his structure and sort of make it my own here for this sermon. But in Psalm 139, he puts it into 4 sections. And I think that these are the points that are going to help us, that are going to push us into prayer, honest prayer with God. First is, God is the all-seeing God. God is all-present God. God is the all-creative God. And God is the all-holy God. God is the all-seeing God. God is the all-present God. God is the all-creative God. And God is the all-holy God. So God is the all-seeing God. Verses 1 to 6 paints this picture. It's a majestic picture, really, of the all-seeing God. A God who sees us. Psychiatrist, I've mentioned him before, Kurt Thompson, in his book, The Soul of Shame, once wrote these words: we are all born into the world looking for someone looking for us. We remain in this mode of searching for the rest of our lives. Let me repeat that. We are all born into the world looking for someone looking for us. We remain in this mode of searching for the rest of our lives. You think of a baby after being born, coming into this world, they're looking. They have their eyes looking. And what are they looking for? They're looking for another set of eyes. And if there's grace in that moment, they find the eyes of their mother or their father. They're looking for someone who's looking for them. This need that Kurt Thompson points out is supremely, it's most profoundly met in us seeing a God who sees us. Israel's God, the psalmist's God, revealed ultimately in the person of Jesus Christ, is a God who sees us. Now, there are many examples of this throughout the Scripture. At the Scriptures, we look, there are many examples, but one example I think of is Hagar. In Genesis, Hagar, this person who actually was wanting to help. She was asked to help Abram and Sarai. This is before their names were changed, and she helps them. And then the end result is her being abandoned, mistreated. And then she encounters the angel of the Lord. And in Genesis 16, verse 13, this is what we read. So she, that's Hagar, called the name of the Lord who spoke to her. You are a God of seeing. For she said, truly, here I have seen him who looks after me. She encounters the angel of the Lord. She encounters God in that moment, something of God in that moment. And all she is left with is saying, you are a God of seeing. For she said, truly, here I have seen him who looks after me. Then we move along. There's so many examples, but you think of John's gospel when Jesus is calling the disciples in John 1, verses 47, we see these words. Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him and said to him, behold, an Israelite indeed, in whom there is no deceit. Nathanael said to him, how do you know me? And Jesus answered him, before Philip called you, when you were under the fig tree, I saw you. Nathanael answered him, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel. And this is actually quite funny because then Jesus says, well, because I said to you, I saw you under the fig tree, do you believe? You will see greater things than these. But do you understand what's happening here? Nathanael was so struck by the fact that he was seen by Jesus. And he gives out all this messianic language, and Jesus saying, well, hold on a second. You're going to see a lot more than that. But just the very fact that Nathanael was seen in that moment, he was seen, perhaps unbeknownst to him, fully in that moment by God. He was looking for someone who was looking for him, and he found none other than God himself in the flesh, looking for him, calling him out. Has it ever happened to you, something where you may be at an event or a situation and you're hoping that someone notices you, you're hoping that someone actually is interested in maybe talking to you, having a conversation with you? You know, for me, I remember when I was living in England, I was doing this one-year postgraduate study, and it was in Oxford, England, and studying apologetics, like the defense of the Christian faith. And in this one term, we had a 1-week study of C.S. Lewis, the work of C.S. Lewis. And one day during that week, we had the privilege of going to C.S. Lewis's house and listening to Walter Hooper, who at the time, he's passed away recently, but Walter Hooper was in his 70s at the time, brilliant mind, but he was really probably the most authoritative voice on the work of C.S. Lewis. And we listened to him just wax eloquently about the life of Lewis. And it was, if you hadn't felt smart at all, you sort of felt like in Oxford, you just by osmosis, you could become smart just by being in certain buildings. And we were there in C.S. Lewis's house, and you're just sort of like just peeling, trying to like the brain juice off of these walls. And we listened to Walter Hooper, and I remember he had a time of Q&A, and I asked him a question. And it was a great time, wonderful time. And a couple weeks later, I was talking to one of my teachers and said, hey, would I be able to get Walter Hooper's email? I have questions. I'm writing this essay, and it's about Lewis, and I think I could help get some help if I just had him answer some questions for me. And so he said, yeah, sure. But he said, look, if you write him, he's probably going to want to meet you because he has a lot of free time now. And I said, seriously, he'd meet with me? And I said, that would be amazing. He said, yeah, we'll just see how it goes. Ask him the questions. So I sent him his email. And I get a response maybe that day or the next day back from Walter Hooper. And in the email to him, I said, look, I don't know if you remember me. I asked this question in the Q&A. This was the question I asked, and I really appreciated your answer. And here's my reason why, if you can just answer these questions for me. We're writing this essay on Lewis and blah, 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 blah. And he wrote back to me, and I'll never forget in the email. I think I have it saved. He said, Nathan, of course I remember you. You were sitting in this particular spot. I remember actually what you were even wearing. I remember your question. It was a great question. And he remembered all these details. And I was so struck by the fact that he remembered me. He saw me. And then I remember when we met, a week later, we met for tea, very British, we met for tea at his flat in Oxford. And he knew all these details. He said, yeah, I loved how you thought of that question, but all these details. And the big idea is he saw me. He was a guy who I had on such a high level, and he saw me. Far more than that human experience. God, we see in Psalm 139, is the all-seeing God. He has seen you. He sees you in this moment. No matter where we find ourselves, God has seen you, and he sees you. God is the all-seeing God, but he's also the all-present God. In verse 8, we read these words, if I make my bed in Sheol, even there you are. Sheol, as I mentioned already, is a place that signified chaos, death. And here the psalmist is punctuating the fact that there is no place we can go where God is not able to reach into and to heal, to restore, and to work. I just want you for a moment to imagine the most godforsaken place that comes to mind in your life. Maybe it's a city, maybe it's a neighborhood, maybe it's a relationship. Maybe it's more personal than that. But either way, it's a place where you'd say God is not active. God is not there. He might be many places, but he's not there. If you have that in your mind, just hold that. Hold that thought. Because the psalmist is speaking into that moment, that relationship, situation, and he's saying, God is right there. The very place when we have said he's not there, the psalmist is saying that's exactly where he is. God is there. Death, God can go there, and death will not beat him. We see this in the words of Peter in his sermon in Acts 2, verses 22. Men of Israel, said Peter in his sermon, hear these words, Jesus of Nazareth, a man attested to you by God with mighty works and wonders and signs that God did through him in your midst. As you yourselves know, this Jesus delivered up according to the definite plan and foreknowledge of God, you crucified and killed by the hands of lawless men. Here's a clincher. God raised him up, loosing the pangs of death because it was not possible for him to be held by it. Death could not hold Jesus down. The psalmist here is saying, even if I make my bed in Sheol, this place of death, even you, God, are there. All the things that we have deemed too much for God, or we've sensed defeat, God is saying, actually, no, I can come in there. I can get in there. I can restore. I can heal. Don't count me out. I can get in there. Because he is the all-seeing, all-present God. A singer who some of you will know, her stage name was Nightbird, and she gathered almost a cult-like following by her performance on America's Got Talent. And she passed away sadly earlier this year. But her performance was not only moving because of just her sheer ability, but it was because of her battle with cancer. And in her battle with cancer, she wrote almost an essay/poem. And this was in 2021. Just writing about her battle with cancer, but also all the adversity she'd faced. And I think it really puts into perspective how we see in different ways this God who is all present. Let me read to you this poem. It's called God is on the Bathroom Floor. It's a bit long, but hopefully just stay with me because it puts it in perspective. This is what she wrote. I don't remember most of autumn because I lost my mind late in the summer and for a long time after that. I wasn't in my body. I was a light bulb buzzing somewhere far. After the doctor told me I was dying and after the man I married said he didn't love me anymore, I chased a miracle in California, and 16 weeks later, I got it. The cancer was gone. But when my brain caught up with it all, something broke. I later found out that all the tragedy at once had caused a physical head trauma, and my brain was sending false signals of excruciating pain and panic. I spent 3 months propped against the wall. On nights that I could not sleep, I laid in the tub like an insect, staring at my reflection in the shower knob. I vomited until I was hollow. I rolled up under my robe on the tile. The bathroom floor became my place to hide, where I could scream and be ugly, where I could sob and spit and eventually doze off, happy to be asleep, even with my head on the toilet. I've had cancer 3 times now, and I've barely passed 30. There are times when I wonder what I must have done to deserve such a story. I fear sometimes that when I die and meet with God, that he will say I disappointed him, or offended him, or failed him. Maybe he'll say I just never learned the lesson, or that I wasn't grateful enough. But one thing I know for sure is he can never say that he did not know me. I am God's downstairs neighbor, banging on the ceiling with a broomstick. I show up at his door every day, sometimes with songs, sometimes with curses, sometimes apologies, gifts, questions, demands. Sometimes I use my key under the mat to let myself in. Other times I sulk outside until he opens the door to me himself. I have called him a cheat and a liar, and I meant it. I have told him I wanted to die, and I meant it. Tears have become the only prayer I know. Prayers roll over my nostrils and drip down my forearms. They fall to the ground as I reach for him. These are the prayers I repeat night and day. Sunrise, sunset. Call me bitter if you want to. That's fair. Count me among the angry, the cynical, the offended, the hardened. But count me also among the friends of God, for I have seen him in rare form. I have felt his exhale, laid in his shadow, squinted to read the message he wrote for me in the grout. I'm sad too. If an explanation would help, he would write me one, I know it. But maybe an explanation would only start an argument between us, and I don't want to argue with God. I want to lay in a hammock with him and trace the veins in his arms. I remind myself that I'm praying to the God who let the Israelites stay lost for decades. They begged to arrive in the promised land, but instead he let them wander, answering prayers they didn't pray. For 40 years, their shoes didn't wear out. Fire lit their path each night. Every morning, he sent them mercy bread from heaven. I look hard for the answers to the prayers that I didn't pray. I look for the mercy bread that he promised they'd bake, fresh for me each morning. The Israelites called it manna, which means, what is it? I see mercy in the dusty sunlight that outlines the trees, in my mother's crooked hands, in the blanket my friend left for me, in the harmony of the wind chimes. It's not the mercy that I asked for, but it is mercy nonetheless. And I learn a new prayer. Thank you. It's a prayer I don't mean yet, but will repeat until I do. Call me cursed, call me lost, call me scorned, but that's not all. Call me chosen, blessed, sought after. Call me the one who God whispers his secrets to. I'm the one whose belly is filled with loaves of mercy that were hidden from me. Even on days when I'm not so sick. Sometimes I go lay on the mat in the afternoon light to listen for him. I know it sounds crazy and I can't really explain it, but God is in there, even now. I've heard it said that some people can't see God because they won't look low enough, and it's true. If you can't see him, look lower. God is on the bathroom floor. God is on the bathroom floor. You see what she's saying? You see what she said? She's saying something of a psalm. That the places that are most dire, desperate, dark, they're like ghettoized, no-go zones. That's exactly where we find God. We can find God in those moments, in those situations. God is exactly there. This all-seeing God, all-present God. And third, all-creative God. In verse 13, the psalmist says, you form me. You form me. You see, we have been formed by God, intricately woven together by him. This means that you are valuable. In a way, this is not a culturally subversive or contrarian point, because this is almost very culturally smooth as silk. You know, everyone's valuable, you are valuable, but the question is, why are you valuable? The Christian perspective says you are valuable because you've been made by God. You have been made by God. Some of the most disheartening trends and alarming realities in this world right now are the struggles that not only our culture faces, but youth face. And so much of the struggle, so much of the pain that the young in our world face orbits around, it presses in on this idea of the value of human life. You know, for me, I discovered this, I saw this up close and personal as I led a ministry initiative between 2015 and 2020 of big question events across North America. And we would address a group of speakers of us, we would address leading questions in the culture, and then we would have Q&A panel times, and we would have an anonymity form in which students could send their question and then they would get voted on. And I'll never forget, in 2019, we had this event in Las Vegas, a room packed full of hundreds of students, And in all the questions, these were the 4 that trended highest. At the top of the list was, if a Christian commits suicide, will he go to heaven? 2, how do you get over porn addiction? 3, if I'm a guy and I'm raped, is it my fault? 4, I am pregnant and I haven't told anyone and I want to get an abortion. What should I do? And I think back years before at an event in Toronto. Again, room packed with people, and you look out at this, you look at all these students' faces, everyone's happy, it looks like they're happy, everyone's playing with their phones, at the same time they're laughing, it looks great, and then you see the number one question trending is in that moment, where is God when I'm cutting? Where is God, in other words, when I'm harming myself? You see, so many of the questions in this world actually come back to the value of human life. They press in on this question of human worth. You formed me, says the psalmist. This all-creative God has formed us. He shaped us. And because of that, you are sacred. You and I are sacred because that which God has made is sacred. And because of that, that's why we upset. That's why there's this consternation, this stress, this anxiety when we see the value of human life compromised, bullied, abused, violated, because that is something that's sacred being violated or exploited. But the ethic comes back not to, like, you shouldn't do that because you shouldn't do that. It comes back to actually God has made you. God has made us fearfully and wonderfully. All-seeing God, all-present God, all-creative God, and the all-holy God. Derek Kidner, the great Bible scholar, once wrote these words: the abrupt change in the psalm from reverie to resolve is disturbing, but it's wholly biblical in its realism. The psalmist is airing it all out. And there's this holy zeal mixed with anger. But we shouldn't miss the point, amid the jarring factor of that part, of the holiness of God, that the psalmist is coming to him. He comes back to him and he says, I need your help. I need you. Search me. Lead me in the way everlasting. So what do we do with all this? What do we do with Psalm 139? I want to suggest to you maybe we take cues from the psalmist. Because for the psalmist, it started with this all-seeing God. His relationship, his engagement did not begin with him entering in, as actually God has already said, I see you, I'm with you, I made you, I'm holy. So questions for us are, first of all, do we know this? Do we know this at an experiential level? Because Christianity it's not just this disconnect between academic ideas that we just try to figure it out. Actually, there's a direct link between the head and the heart. Thankfully, in Christianity. Do we know this? Do you know God's eyes on you? Do you know that God sees you? God sees you. Do you know God's presence with you? That He is with you? Do you know that He has made you, this all-creative God? Do you know His holiness? You see, the instructions for Psalm 139, when we leave this morning and head out to whatever we're doing today and the rest of the week, what are the instructions? The instructions are simply an invitation. An invitation. An invitation, first of all, simply to engage. To engage with Him, this God who sees us, is with us, has created us, who's holy. But more than that, it's an invitation to simply live in light of that. To live with this God, a God who sees you, knows you, is with you, has created you, and is a holy God. That hopefully provides the means by which we can come to God and just lay it all out there and be honest in prayer. Let's pray. God, you are the one who knows us most intimately, most personally. This morning, I pray particularly for any of us here who would feel as though we're on the outside looking in. And I pray, Lord, that we would experience that same experience that Nathanael had of Jesus calling out to him and saying, I saw you.